Why are you pretending to eat chicken?
Excuse me? This chicken is quite real to me.
Yeah, okay, but it doesn't have...
Nutrients?
Yeah.
What's the last thing you ate?
Bologna and an orange?
So, no holographic foods? So to me, you never ate? Or we could try respecting each other.
So the highly anticipated Rick and Morty Season 4 has premiered, and I wanted to try something new today, so let's go over my first impressions on it. Bear in mind my opinion can change, probably even radically. And a lot of what I'm saying is based off of the notes I wrote down on a notepad while watching it. So if my thoughts seem jumbled, pardon me. So this episode, Edge of Tomorty, Rick Die and Repeat, was about Rick and Morty finding death crystals, basically crystals that can predict your death, and since you're alive, there's basically a vast amount of deaths, more on that later on. It sounds like a really cool concept, and it left room for great execution. Now, will I say that the entire episode had either a great or terrible execution right off the bat? No, actually. In fact, I was actually very nervous that I would have to come on here and basically say that this episode was basically boring and didn't add anything new to the table, but no, it actually gave me a lot to talk about, so let's get into this. I saw the intro and I thought it looked really cool. It had a lot of different beings, the art style looks really great, better than ever. I noticed that they put a lot of work into refining that. When the episode starts, it starts off with a commentary on cyberstalking.
Morty's on Jessica's Instagram again.
Get out of here, jerk!
Summer, stop shaming your brother. Morty, stop being a creepy, perverted cyberstalker.
If I had a nickel for every time they did commentary on some sort of new social issue, but only mentioned it in jest rather than actually diving into it and finding something truly funny or valuable about the topic, then I would be able to hire someone to dox the Twitter user that triggered them so much. At first, I thought this was just my cynical/skeptical brain looking too deeply into buzzwords such as, and this is not the entire list by the way, gaslighting, bullying, shaming, court of public opinion, public message boards. It all just seems a little too on the nose for a show that was praised for its writing. I'm not saying that the mere mention of these topics is lame. However, they don't dive into these topics, selecting to rather sprinkle them in during conversations to make this episode look smarter than it actually is. The show follows continuity, with the family requiring Rick to need to ask the family, or Morty, before taking him on an adventure. At first, I thought it was making Rick's character look soft because he's succumbing to his family's needs. And while on one hand I understand him wanting to show that he cares for his family, the reason that we like Rick is not because he cares. So it is one of those situations where you do need to be on point when it comes to character development and storytelling. There were a few funny jokes in here. I particularly like the joke about the asteroids, which is a joke that was seen on the promotional trailers that were being broadcasted everywhere. However, there was another good joke in here when Rick was battling Morty by using a Meeseeks bot, and essentially because they were in Rick's spaceship, the windshield breaks. All the sound in the episode basically went mute to emulate the effect. The comedy is coming from one of the title characters, and the other character, well, he has a few problems here. So in the beginning, when they get the death crystals and they explain the powers and effects that it has, Morty, while using a death crystal, sees that there is a possibility that he would die with Jennifer. And if you don't know, Jennifer is someone that he crushes for and wants often. So now that he's obsessed with knowing how to get to this specific death, his lack of care while operating the spaceship causes Rick to die. And according to the protocol he has with the other Ricks, he is able to basically regenerate himself, but essentially in another dimension. This leads to us seeing a whole bunch of different Ricks, and they all get their own spotlight. From Fascist Rick to Shrimp Rick, and there was this weird Rick where it was just like a little being or an alien being. I don't really know how to explain that one. Now I do find it funny that when Rick confronted Fascist Rick, Fascist Morty was complaining that basically he ended up killing the real Fascist Rick, which was a great twist by the way, because he felt like things were getting
Too political. I want to have fun, classic Rick and Morty adventures like in the old days.
Then we'll get along fine, Fascist Morty.
I just find the meta commentary here to be a tad bit hypocritical, because while this version of Rick and Morty may have that sort of ground, the other version of Rick and Morty, basically the real Morty that we know and the holographic Rick that comes when Rick dies, to instruct Morty on how to basically revive Rick so that he's in this dimension again, they get super political. In fact, the hologram Rick is the one who brings up a lot of these buzzwords.
I'm a crisis detection and correction hologram generated by a chip that real Rick put in your spine. Real in quotes because calling density privileged entities real is incredibly holophobic.
He seems to be highly sensitive and offended, and I kind of understand why his character is to exist. It's to basically make fun of people who act that way. However, there's something stopping me from enjoying this. Overly sensitive characters, yes, great material to make fun of. However, I don't feel like this character is truly a character. I feel like, yes, while he is a hologram, he was clearly written to be one note. And because of that, the show just comes across as very bitter, not appearing to understand the other side enough to make a solid parody of. And plus, considering that, yes, it is a meme that the show is only watched by people with a high IQ, it doesn't exactly seem like smart writing to have a character so one note, while also trying to be preachy in your messaging here. I also noticed the attempts to be modern. If you were to tell me, a year ago, that an episode of Rick and Morty would feature a direct reference to Pixar's Coco? Wait a minute, it's not even a reference, they flat out say Pixar's Coco.
What if I killed you? Would you be strutting then? Only if the events of the Pixar movie Coco are to be believed, which I doubt.
However, focusing on Morty's plot, this is actually what makes the episode not as enjoyable for me. I found Morty's character to just be totally unlikable. I understand the power of love can make people do crazy things, but the power of love can make people do entertaining things. And I guess that power didn't hit Morty. Tons of times, it's literally just Morty looking through the Death Crystal and seeing the future perspective and basically following that. Now, it would be funny if they interlace some jokes there, and I do understand the attempt, but let's go through one of them specifically. So since Morty is walking around being very arrogant that he's not going to die, he meets up with the school bully, and through Morty's cockiness, they end up arranging a fight to which Morty would easily win because he's using Rick's weapons. Then the episode would try to ramp up the seriousness of all of this by having the police and the SWAT force. And for such a smart show, or a show that really wants to let you know that it's trying to be smart by layering in all these words, you would think the escalation from a single police car to the entire army would seem a little too unrealistic for a simple kid fighting a simple bully behind a simple parking lot, it seems.
I will sways always remember our time in Peru. I will always remember our time in Peru.
Now, I do understand Morty fixating on one death because it just seems like a strategic thing to do, but for his character to be locked down so one note here, I didn't want to see him fail, and I didn't want to see him succeed. Plus, considering that this is going to be the season premiere, they really didn't build up that Morty would act this way. He only seems to act this way literally at the drop of a dime. So between hologram Rick being a poor man's version of a poor man's version of a poor man's version of an SJW, Morty's laser-locked focus, and the judge's character in the court scene, I found the Morty part of the plot to be just completely unwatchable. And it would have led me into saying that this is a terrible episode through and through, just the complete episode, if it wasn't for Rick's side. I enjoyed Rick's side because it focused more on the storytelling than it did on the commentary. While it did have certain themes such as fascism in it, it was a simple story of Rick dying every time and being in a different dimension where he has to understand their culture and their morals and their standards. It led into some great jokes, and it just got funnier and funnier with each death. The worst part of the episode here to me was when Morty was straight in front of Jessica, and because he's so fixated on this death, he ignores Jessica? This episode could have been at least partially saved if he said, "Screw it, I got the opportunity now, I'm gonna go through with it now." It just made his character so unnecessarily dumb. Are you telling me that Morty wouldn't take this opportunity right in front of him when he's done that before? This isn't the first time that Morty's love of Jessica got in the way of Rick's plans. I know it seems very rich of me to say considering who I am and what I cover, but this does remind me of the worries I had going into Gumball Season 5 and 6. Basically, rather than having decent storytelling and a strong episode, it would much rather focus on trends and talking points and meta commentary. I love meta commentary as much as the next person, but the point of meta commentary in these specific instances is to stick out. However, because Rick and Morty and Gumball Season 5 and 6 have dug a hole for themselves by over-relying on this modern trend, it would be really hard for them to write an episode that seems like it's breaking through the paper to provide something groundbreaking and try to show that it's not like other cartoons. If I were to coin a term for this, I am meta fatigued. Going back to Rick's part, because I do want to really sell the point that Rick's part was great here, the last time that he was cloned in this episode, he was a wasp. And he had a really great scene in the kitchen with the other Rick and his family. It made a full circle back to his dimension and his family, not the dimension that we know, but that Wasp Dimension's family, all being on the same page. Because Rick in Wasp form has to ask the family, and he seems perfectly okay, even in this instance, where he actually didn't get to go on an adventure with Morty. And because the meta commentary on fascism and bullying and gaslighting and shaming and whatever else that I missed wasn't enough, they also have meta commentary on the fact that the characters actually didn't learn anything.
Guess I gotta learn how to live in the moment a little more.
Oh boy, so you actually learned something today? What is this, Full House?
I do understand that characters don't necessarily have to learn a new thing at the end of the episode and then take that learned new thing and apply it in every new episode going forward, but what is the point in telling me all of this? This is like the equivalent of me going at the end of a video that this is a bad video and I don't know why anyone watched it. It just makes me feel like I'm wasting my time. They have a callback to the first episode, where at the end they have this iconic scene where Morty is like spasming on the floor and Rick is just going on and on about the adventures that they're going to have. They kind of replicate that scene here with Summer. You probably noticed that I don't talk about the family that much. They don't really have so much of a focus in this episode. They seem fine for the most part, although I did find Jerry to be a little bit annoying with his overprotection of Morty. And in fact, the last joke with Summer was actually really good. While I really did enjoy the Rick part of the episode, and it really makes me want to say that this is like an above average episode or even a good episode, the Morty parts were just completely annoying. They were unwatchable, they were irritating, and it kind of seemed unrealistic towards his character. I remember back when I made the poll, are you going to be watching the latest season of Rick and Morty, and it was pretty mixed. I totally see why now. This episode just seems very bitter. It seems like it's trying to preach and say something to me. But rather than saying what it actually means, it just portrays these characters like hologram Rick in a way where I'm supposed to take away what it's trying to say. If this is what I'm looking forward to in Rick and Morty season 4, 5, whatever, then hard pass for me. If I wanted to see people preach and not have a conversation and basically talk at each other and not towards each other, then I would just open up Twitter and scroll through my timeline. I don't need you to dedicate months and months and months to animating an episode to tell me the exact same thing that I can get on my timeline. So while the art style and animation seems to be great, they are still good at pulling off a few funny jokes, and I can appreciate the callbacks. I personally couldn't recommend this episode. However, there may be Rick and Morty fans in the comments section. Maybe they can give you a stronger case than I. Anyways, let me know what you thought of these first impressions videos. I kind of want to do these a little bit more. They're very raw and uncut. They wouldn't replace actual reviews, but just for things as highly anticipated as this, I wanted to get my thoughts on the matter out as quickly as possible. Until then, big thanks to the supporters of November. And if you want to see the verses I did with Rick and Morty's Me Seeks and Destroy and Foster's Home The Trouble with Scribbles, click here. Until then, take care. Alpha out.